So it was a few months ago when I said that gamers don't really care about FPS. They play favorites all the time. Whenever it's convenient, sometimes they'll say, oh, it's because of this or because of that. Now, I'm saying this because I remember Gotham Knights got dragged for being 30 FPS. I also know that there were people who were not happy with the game because the 30 FPS performance was not stable. So there were two layers of the dragging. One of them, in my mind, was valid, and the one that was valid was the game was not running at a steady 30 FPS at launch. But the one to me that was like, what? Was the one that people said, well, it's not 60 FPS, so the game is trash. That one I could not necessarily wrap my mind around. So this conversation stemmed from a little tweet that I got. Somebody tagged me on this tweet where A Plague Tale is getting a console version at 60 FPS. It proves my point because the game was not at 60 FPS when a bunch of people played it, and they still enjoyed the game. So again, gamers don't necessarily care about 60 FPS. But I'll keep building this case just little by little. So here's what I think. I think the expectation about 60 FPS was based on the clever marketing of Microsoft's Xbox and Sony's PlayStation 5. If you look at your Xbox very carefully, you'll see a little disclaimer that talks about the 4K 120 FPS gaming capability that is dependent on the software. In fact, it's so small here on the Xbox, you can't even see it in a picture. But I got another one for you. The PlayStation 5 allows for us to at least see that a similar reference is made here. It's not the same language, but here's a PlayStation 1 that says 8K, 4K, 120 Hz, and HDR content require a compatible display and supporting software. Both console manufacturers, they put the responsibility of 60 FPS on the games. So if the game does not do it, we can't do it, which is not fair because some games cannot realistically run on these consoles at 60 FPS. Also, even in the PC landscape, we play games based on what our hardware can do. If your PC is running a 1070 and you can only get 30 FPS with your 1070 on a game, then that's what you're going to play the game at, and no one will complain about it. You see, it's only in the new generation console world that everybody thinks that they're entitled to 60 FPS because the manufacturer pretty much gave themselves an out for giving you a device that may not be able to play a game at 60 FPS because your hardware cannot support it. But again, how am I over here saying that gamers don't really care about FPS? Well, the answer is quite simple. Just recently, the conversation changed gears a little bit, and everybody is dogging on Zelda and the fans because the new Zelda game is coming out, and a lot of people are throwing out the 30 FPS stuff all over the place. I was today's years old when I found out 30 FPS games is different from new 30 FPS games. J-Dub is on Twitter today, and this cat is trolling everybody. So watch out, because I'm going to go ahead and read this stuff. Whether I agree with them or not is not, is none of my concern. I'm just going to show you how the landscape is changing like crazy. Okay, so here's this one. I want you to look at the score for this game. 720p to 900p at 30 FPS. This is all it takes to essentially become Game of the Year. Clearly, graphics don't matter. This is by Frogbox1 Gaming, so shout out to you, bro, for actually putting this out here. Me, if a game is 20 to 30 FPS on my Switch versus me if a game is locked on 60 FPS, zero performance issues on my PS5. These are people that are basically just going at, to basically say their mind. This person said, wait, wasn't everybody, pissed off about new games being 30 FPS like last week? All of a sudden, Zelda's got 96 in its Metacritic score. In fact, trending right now says 30 FPS. You click it, and this is pretty much what it is. I was on the trending page, and more people have been posting just lately. If you notice, this is what's going on. So clearly, it doesn't really matter. I understand. This hardware manufacturer, Nintendo, did not tell you that they were going to give you up to 60 FPS. Now, that's the difference between them and the PlayStation and the Xbox people. But at the end of the day, the Xbox people also told you, we'll give you up to that if the software can do it. Here, you can see Digital Foundry has already put up their Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, with the DF Tech review. And basically what they're saying is it's too big for the Switch. So the hardware is basically not able to support the game. This happens with video games once they become more ambitious, once they eventually start to make the game much more expansive. But, it's just one of those things where gamers are going to just do what it is that gamers do, which is, for the most part, some will not be consistent. I can also understand, by the way, people will talk about Redfall and so on and so forth. But here's the truth. Redfall, according to the development team, if it's not running at the 30 FPS, then that's the problem. That's where the problem should be. But if the game is running at 30 FPS, then people cannot necessarily, in one hand, criticize them and then hail Zelda. Even though the hardware cannot do 60 FPS, if you even say that by yourself, if you open your mouth to defend Zelda, you're saying that it's fine. Pretty much it's what you're doing. But let's keep reading. Xbox fanboys down bad. They're trying to use Zelda as an example of 30 FPS being okay. Difference between Redfall and Zelda is that Zelda is actually a good game and on a handheld. Redfall is dull and on a most powerful console. Hey, if you think Redfall is dull and you think Zelda is great, that's fine. They're not talking about how good the game is, though. You see, this is how people argue what you're not arguing. They're talking about how the performance of the game is what people are looking at in a sense to judge the game. So that's a whole different conversation. That's a conversation y'all can have later on. So let me get this straight. Tears of the Kingdom setting is exactly the same as Breath of the Wild, 720 30 FPS with frame drops, and you're going to tell me it's a 10 out of 10. By the way, I'm sure the game is good and fun, but a 10 out of 10? Hey, it is what it is. Gamers don't really care about FPS. This person said Nintendo does their own. They don't care about PlayStation. They don't care about Xbox. They released the latest Pokemon game at 15 FPS, 677p, and still sell millions. You think they care about Redfall at 30 FPS? Redfall has bigger issues than 30 FPS. So they're talking about the quality of the game. We're talking about the performance of the game. This person says unacceptable. I don't care if it's a Switch, a game that can't even run solid 30 FPS in 2023 for the console it's designed for is absolutely pathetic. Okay, that's your business. Reforged Gaming says, Reforged Gaming was one of the folk that came after me with Gotham Knights being 30 FPS when I told them that we actually knew that Gotham Knights was at 30 FPS because PlayStation Access, they said it, and that video had about 20,000 views. So he had some hot takes, and he tried to kind of come at me on Twitter, but he didn't know he was stepping into the fire. So when I kind of laid out everything for him, he and his people were kind of trying to gang up on me, but they found out that, this is one of those people that don't quit. So he says this, a quick way to find people who lack intellectual depth. You see, it's already throwing out shade. They think Zelda Tears of the Kingdom at 30 FPS is the same as next-gen games running at 30 FPS. Yes. A false equivalency is an informal fallacy. Bruh. Okay, let me just read. And surefire way to see that someone doesn't know what they're talking about. Maybe I should make a video about this particular take by itself, because this is an asinine take, because they're not arguing the quality or the fun nature of the game, because we've had other games that can go toe-to-toe with Zelda in terms of how good they are that were still at 30 FPS, like Spider-Man 2018, God of War's 2018 game, Horizon Zero Dawn. So that's not what they're arguing. They're not arguing the quality of the game. They're arguing the performance of the game, in a sense, meaning gamers are okay with the performance in the game when it's convenient. Yet, in other aspects, they want to be upset with other games that run at 30 FPS when we've been given the caveat that some games may not run at 60 FPS or 120 FPS, as these consoles advertise that they're capable of doing. This is the equivalency that he's trying to maybe make, but the argument he's making is kind of nonsensical to me anyways. That's how I read it. But Best of Truth says, PlayStation fanboys, this is one of those console comments anyways. Let's just keep going with it. Sony makes the best games. Games should focus on 4K cinematic visual fidelity. 30 FPS is bad for games. Nintendo releasing a game at 720 FPS dips into the low 20 FPS that I could run on my phone that scored better than everything Sony makes. So this is throwing shade at Sony. But we can keep going on and on to read this stuff. And to me, it just continues to prove my point, however the situation lies, that a lot of people that really threw shade at Gotham Knights not being 30 FPS, this is different from people throwing shade at Gotham Knights for not performing consistently at 30 FPS at launch, by the way, and making sure I differentiate that, to me, was mostly an overreaction. And the reason I say it was mostly an overreaction is because at 30 FPS, the game does not look as good as it could look at 60 FPS. But that has never necessarily been a big factor in gaming, especially the fact that just in the recent few years, including the next few weeks, we've held games in a high esteem, even though they've been at 30 FPS. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.